Hi, hello, and welcome to Rebel Unicorn Crafts. Today we're going to be making 3 easy crafts with old fluid painting canvases. Sometimes it's really hard to let our old art go, but sometimes it's not really worth keeping in the state it is, so let's repurpose these. For all of these crafts we're going to be doing today, you're going to need to release a canvas from the wooden frame, and I have some tips and tricks at the end for removing it and selecting your canvas. First up, to give our art a second life, is kind of a simple bookmark. For this, you're going to need an old canvas, some sort of cutting tool, whether that is an X-Acto or scissors. You'll need some ribbon, some glue, and a ruler. The first thing you want to do is just take a look at your canvas and kind of evaluate the area that you want to be featured on your project. Then you're going to want to flip it over and measure your ribbon and then draw lines that are going to reflect the width of your ribbon along that area that you think is going to look nice. To cut this, you can use some nice sharp scissors, or if you have one of these cutting tools, that also works great. You'll already have your piece cut to the width, but cut it to the length you wanted. Mine is 2 by 6 inches. Then I took some of this fabric glue. It's, I think, called no-sew glue, available from most craft stores, but any sort of glue that also works on fabric should work for this because the canvas is fabric and so is the ribbon. Make sure you get a nice good layer of that glue all over it. I used a scrap piece of the canvas and then I lined it up to the top and the sides, and I left the other part of the ribbon long because I wasn't sure how long I wanted my bookmark to be. I pushed it down and then I used a book to sit on this to weigh it down while it dried, so it dried nice and flat. Once it's dried, then you can come back and finish it off by snipping off the end. I left a bit of a tail on mine so that it would hang out of the book, and I cut mine on a diagonal. And then this is optional, but if you want, you can use some sort of a lighter or fire source very carefully and just burn the end so that it melts and doesn't fray. Next up, we have some quick and easy coasters. These are really good for cracked canvases because they're flat, so they don't need to be bent and they won't chip or anything. For this, the supplies you're going to need are the canvas, some felt, scissors or a cutting tool, a ruler, and some glue. Again, assess your canvas to see if there's a part that you want to make sure to use. This one had pretty equal coverage of areas that I would be happy with. Flip it over and I measured out a square pattern of 4-inch squares and cut them out individually. Then we want to add some padding for the bottoms of these so they don't scratch any surfaces. So you could either do the same process to your felt or cork or whatever you are using, or if you're like me and you're worried that you won't cut the right shapes, you can glue these down directly onto your soft material and then let them dry and cut them out from the material directly. Again, I'm using that sewing glue because it just works so well on fabric. Remember to spread the glue evenly to all the corners with a nice generous coat but not too thick, and then to dry it, put something heavy on top to make sure it dries flat. Once dry, if you did it like me, you will need to cut these out. If not, then you're already done. And now we've got some functional and cute repurposed coasters. Next up is one of our most difficult projects out of this, but it's my favorite. A DIY sketchbook or notepad. And this one will take a little more supplies and a little more time. So make sure you've got enough time, and you will need an old canvas, a ruler, cutting tools, paper, a punch or tack, as well as an embroidery thread and an embroidery needle. The very first thing you need to do is find a canvas that has pliable paint on it so that it will bend without cracking. Again, start by deciding where on the canvas you want your features to be shown so that you can try to take advantage of that, and measuring out on the back side of the canvas your cuts. Keep in mind that when you're making these, you're going to be folding them over, so your length is obviously going to be cut in half. I made mine 4 inches wide by 9 inches long, so that when it's folded over, it will be 4 by 4.5 inches, a nice little square sketchbook, great for travel. Cut out your piece. This is going to form the cover for us. Then we need to cut out the paper to go on the inside. I personally am going to be using a nice thick watercolor paper because I want this for sketching and painting and that type of thing. So with this thick paper, we can really only get about 3 to 4 sheets folded over, so it'll make 6 sheets, but you can use each side, so it's even more than that. And we want to make these so they're going to fit on the inside, so about the same size, if not just slightly smaller than we made the cover. You can do this with scrap paper, printer paper, anything like that. If it's a lighter weight paper, you'll probably be able to get away with putting more sheets in there. If you have a paper cutting tool like this, it will make the job a lot easier, but this can also totally be done by measuring it out and cutting with scissors. If you're doing watercolor paper like me, be careful of putting too many fingerprints on this because you can damage the paper with the oils, so you could also consider wearing some gloves. With your sheets cut out, you're going to want to give these a nice crease down the center by folding them over in half, and then I like to use the butt of something with a plastic piece on it to push down and really make sure that that crease is nice and tight. As you crease the papers, just stack them within each other so that the creases all butt up against each other, and then we'll also crease the canvas so that we know where the middle is. We're going to be doing a 3-punch binding. I think that this is one of the easiest ones to do, so if you have a punch tool, that's going to really help you. But what you want to do is take your little book and put the paper into the center. I have a punch tool. You could also do this with a tack or something sharp, but you want it to be sturdy so that it's not going to slip and hurt you. But place the paper inside, and then we're going to place 3 evenly spaced punches down the center going through all of the layers. I like to do this on top of a piece of cardboard because as you punch through, you're not going to damage the surface underneath it as much, but it also gives kind of a satisfying crunch, and you know when you're all the way through. So make 3 holes that go through all layers evenly spaced. Thread up an embroidery needle with 1 loose end and a long tail. And then we're going to actually stitch this book together. Start by taking the needle through the center from the outside going into the center. And you're going to want to leave a long tail on the outside of the book, at least about 3 inches. I usually leave mine still attached to the cord at this point. Then you can go on either side and go from the inside of the book to the outside on one of the outside holes. While you're on the outside of the book, go back in to the other outside hole and pull this tight. And then again, we're going to go back up and through that center hole so that now we have 2 strings that are sitting on the outside of this book. We've got 2 long strings. I left mine a little bit longer than necessary, but it's a little easier to actually tie then, because our last step is we just need to tie these off and our book is bound. I'm sure there are all sorts of fancy knots you could use, but I just did the most basic of knots, and then I tied it into a little bow and did a double knot to finish it off. Even though that one's a little bit more difficult, this notebook turned out super cute, and I love the pattern on the front of it, even though it wasn't my favorite fluid painting, and I'm excited to use it. If you don't already know how to remove these canvases, there are two different ways you can do that to remove them from the wooden frame. The first is to take some pliers and to pull out all of the staples. This definitely works, but it is a little more tedious. The second is to just cut along the edges with an X-Acto blade. This option is definitely more time efficient, but it is obviously a little more dangerous because you are using a sharp blade, so be careful. After you've released it from the wooden frame, you also want to cut off the edges so that it will lay nice and flat so that you know how to actually cut it out without it wrinkling because of those sides. When selecting your canvases to use for different projects, things that are flat like the bookmark or the coasters, it's okay to use a cracked canvas because it's going to sit and be flat and it doesn't need to move around a lot. But for ones like the notepad, since it does need to be creased, you want to make sure you pick a pliable paint that is going to not crack when you fold it over. Typically this is going to be your higher grade artist quality paint, so the paint that I am using is actually a Blick acrylic. The canvas had that on it and it was a nice thin coat, and I find that when you do bend this over it doesn't crack. So find one that has a thin coat of some sort of nicer paint that's more pliable for anything that you're going to want to bend or have be movable. That wraps it up for today. I hope that you had fun looking at these different crafts that you can make. If you make any of these to repurpose your old canvases, let me know in the comments below, or you can share them with me on my Instagrams. I'd love to see what you're doing, and I hope that you have a magically creative day.